Hello and welcome to episode 63 of Just Keep Writing,
a podcast for writers
by writers
to keep you writing.
I'm Marshall.
I'm Nick.
I'm Brent.
And I'm Will.
All right, boys, we're back. I'm excited. It's Pride Month. We're going to have some awesome episodes this month, and I'm really excited to see what happens. But at the top of the show, what I wanted to mention too, because I wanted to give a big shout out to our patrons and the people that have been supporting this show for as long as we've been doing it, and the people that basically make it so we can pay our server fees, pay for our websites, stuff like that. But yeah, man, so I'm going to turn it over to Nick really quick because we have a new way to support the show. One of the awesome ways to support the show is patreon.com/justkeepwriting. Obviously, we've got daily writing prompts and a early access to shows and some other things on the tiers as well. But Nick, what's another way they can support the show that's also maybe a little easier for some folks?
Yeah, it gets a little tiring podcasting once in a while, right? Doing these episodes late at night, back to back, And so once in a while, it's nice to have a cup of coffee, which brings us to Kofi, right? So
I was like, where are you going with this?
All right. I got you. It brings us to Kofi. That is Ko-Fi. I'll post our link in the show notes. We've actually set this up to where you literally can buy us a cup of coffee for $3. So it's a small donation and whatnot to give out to us. So you don't have to do a monthly subscription. This is a one-time donation to us for the show to help show your support for the show. We will have episodes posting on there. Basically, any of the same benefits and tiers that you hit on Patreon, you can have access through Ko-Fi as well, as long as you donate the equal amount for that month. So we'll keep an eye on that and everything. So give it a check out. Give us a cup of coffee to support the show, and we'll drink it and thank you so many times over because coffee is what's needed right now.
Well, and on that note too, like for example, the $10 a month tier is the one where you get writing prompts. So if you gave us $10, I'll figure out a way to get your writing prompts for the month. Basically, is what I'm saying. Rather than go through Patreon, it's totally up to you. But it's a nice way to help us out. So we're just trying to make it easy for folks on their comfort level. So that said, we don't have really conferences and stuff that we do. That's usually what we talk about at the top of the show, but we'll have more about that in the future. I know Comic-Con's coming up in November, and there's some other stuff. What is it? Worldcon December, and then we'll have NaNoWriMo. We'll have all kinds of stuff coming up in the future, but we'll talk about that on future episodes. So, Will, I'm gonna just turn it over to you. I'm a little nervous because I remember how this went the last year when we did this. So I'm just, I'm gonna turn it over to you. And you let us know what we need to talk about for this first episode of Pride Month.
Great. So it's actually going to be my 1-year anniversary of co-hosting the podcast. And it was during Pride Month.
Congratulations. So, thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Why have you stayed for so long? I just want to know that.
Do you want the serious answer?
Why not?
You know what? Let's go for that, Will. Why? What keeps you just here at Just Keep Writing?
Well, the four of us have met for a reason. This is going to be something that you remember me talking about for years. But there's a reason why we were all coming together. Just remember that.
I'm really glad we asked for the serious answer. That made me happy. Thank you.
I may have gotten some butterflies there, guys. I'm not going to lie.
For sure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's a reason that the universe has brought us together and why we're friends and we're becoming closer. And that's really the truth of it. So the rest of it, we'll have a discussion later. So the episode that we did last year was episode 37, and it was on Pride. And I questioned Marshall and Nick just about Pride itself. And we had some good moments where we got to talk about a lot of different spectrums. So my first question is going to go to the three of you. And I would like to know, what books have you read since that episode that featured LGBTQIA plus characters? Marshall, you go first.
I'm gonna go first. I raised my hand. Nobody benefiting from the video feed could see it. I raised my hand. I was very excited because this particular book came on the recommendation of Will, and my wife has also read it. And it's a phenomenal book, Cemetery Boys. And I thoroughly enjoyed that book. The dynamic between the two main characters, how they move through the world, and what their connection, and figuring out how to be together and fight together. I really enjoyed that story. So that's one of the first thing that came to my mind.
Amazing. And Nick, which one did you read? Or ones did you read?
This question shouldn't be as hard as it is, but as you randomly just ask it, and we didn't have any preparation ahead of time. Sorry, I'm trying to get the right name pulled up, not just of book 3, but of the series. I believe the series is called Sufficiently Advanced Magic by Andrew Rowe. And the main character is actually in a process of discovering their sexual identity and stuff like that, and learning about that throughout the series. Mixed in with some fantasy items as well.
Amazing. And Brent, what have you read this year?
This year, okay.
Well, 2020 to 2021.
Okay, so 2020 to now. Okay, so I'm loath to mention this one because the author is kind of proving himself to be a jerk, but I really liked the story. 7 Blades of Black had just this really, really great sapphic, torrid sort of romance in it, and it was it's one of those books is like I like the book so much and I just hate that the author's an asshole, but it was such a good story though. And what else have I read? Recently I read The Unbroken by C.L. Clarke. Amazing. Just
I haven't finished it yet, but it's so good so far.
The way it challenges his identity and like belonging and colonialism, just amazing work. Which I already knew she was going to do, and I told her such. So yeah, I'm happy to see that. Let's see what else. I'm looking at my bookshelf. People that are listening won't realize this, but let's see what else have I read up here. That's because I know there's plenty. I just can't remember all of them. Oh, of course, Max Gladstone. I read his Ruin of Angels. Ruin of Angels was full of like queer characters, and I love that about him, and just how he infuses them into their story. So this that won't actually. The cast was nearly all women, I think, with the exception of maybe 1 or 2 characters, and there was definitely a non-binary character in there as well. So I really appreciate how he brings that to the forefront. Sin in the Still. Sin in the Still had a character that not one of the main characters, but it definitely had a character in there, and she was sapphic. I read Song of Achilles. Like that's just God, rip my heart out and tear it in two and then throw it in the air. Like that was just such a good book. I'm gonna stop there because I don't want to like keep going on. But yeah, there's definitely good queer literature out there.
And I read Bonds of Brass as well. And I really, really enjoyed that book quite a bit. I may have been thinking about that when I said Cemetery Boys, actually. But anyway, yeah, I loved that book. But I mean, it was just such a fun adventure, but also like just seeing those guys try to navigate everything at the same time while they were trying to figure out how they felt about each other was awesome. Really cool.
Did have one more. Ray Bear by Ray Bear. I can't remember the author's name right now. There was an asexual character in there who was prominent, and it was done so well, and it was done. You could tell it was done with the intention of showing, because I think the stereotype that a lot of asexual people run into is that they're cold and they're like standoffish and they're aloof. And this character in that book was loving and kind and just gentle and was just amazingly compassionate. So I love that, like, that character actively fought against those stereotypes. So that's my last one.
Go ahead, Nick.
Yeah, so Ray Bear is written by Jordan Ifuko.
Okay,
I think
there we
that's how
go.
you pronounce it.
Awesome. So my next question is Nick, for Nick. What authors have you read that are queer in the last year?
That is a very good question. And you guys,
And also that you know of, that they're queer.
yeah. So Charlie Jane Anders is actually one of the authors that I've read a couple times in the last year. And correct me if I'm wrong on this one, V.E. Schwab.
Yes.
That is correct. Yes, she is queer.
Both of those were high on my list for this last year.
I'm going to focus on you for a minute, Nick. So
Okay, I'm
with
nervous.
you reading for probably the first time, like really diving into queer authors and with queer characters, and especially before you've admitted that like you never really used to read women authors, right? Or with women characters. And I've seen this like transformation in you where not only are you reading all of this, but like you are completely vibing with the stories and like really enjoying them. So I want you to talk about for you and your experience of never reading about queer people and then really reading more and more as 2020 went on and into 2021. What was that experience like for you?
So it was, I wouldn't even say it was like an overtly unique experience, in a sense of where I was like, oh my gosh, they're such great writers, and I had no idea because I was being so ignorant. For me, it was more of self-discovery and seeing myself in these characters and in these authors' works that I haven't seen in predominantly white male fantasy that I was reading a lot of beforehand. And I kind of, I'll lightly touch on this one, but like my younger years, my early 20s, like I got told a lot like, hey, you're a lot like a girl because you're so emotional. Right. And that's a subject in society that not a lot of people will talk about, like men have emotions and you're okay to express those emotions. And so that portion of me really resonated with these authors and these characters because it was a male who was being emotional and knew what their emotions were and understood them, rather than I'm going to be a rough and gruff barbarian and smash his face in with a hammer, which I love. But at the same time, reading more authors and characters in the LGBTQ community just kind of really helped align myself better, just with my self-identity, I guess you could say. Does that make sense? Or am I rambling?
You're not rambling, but I want to talk about self-identity. When you say that, do you mean that you are allowed or given permission to have emotions just as like a straight cisgendered white man after like reading queer literature? Like, do you feel that there's been a difference in the way that emotions are processed in those books of those characters versus some of the straight white male fantasies that you've read?
Yeah, the emotions are definitely processed different. And they're more, and they're not just surface level. They're a lot deeper. Talk to anyone that knows me. I'm not surface level emotions when I talk about things. Like, I like the deep talk and discussions of that. So, does that answer your question?
It does, yes. And we're going to pause with you and we're going to go to Marshall. So, Marshall, this is my question for you. Reading queer literature and more of it, I would say this year, I think also, not that you didn't read it before, but I know, I've been definitely suggesting more queer literature, and definitely so has Brent. But my question isn't about the books you read. It's actually about how does it feel to have another member of our group not only be Black, but also a part of the queer community? How do you feel like it's affected just your dynamic and then our dynamic?
That's a good question. How do I want to say this? So you're specifically asking how it has changed having Brent on the show now, right?
For you, yes.
For me, yes. So to me, it's huge. Not only have we're able to do these Just Keep White and While Black, which thank you, by the way, again, Will, for really sending me so many texts to make that happen. And it made me really understand that not only was I was missing a lot of things in my life, right? I'm raising a trans boy right now, and very young, and I project on him a lot, right? Like what I don't want him to deal with what I dealt with when I grew up, period. Right. I was called everything under the sun, and I'm and I'm not queer, but that's what I was called all the time. Right. So that's something that I was dealing with for me growing up. But at the same time, I want him to be able to live the life he wants to be able to live, and I want to support him. Right. So having these conversations with Brent, sitting down with Nia and Shingai, and realizing that I don't have enough, God, this is going to sound lame. I don't have enough blackness in my life, period. Right. I live in a very small, rural, white community, and it is rough here for queer kids. I run a club to try to make a space for those kids, and the impetus of me taking on that club was because of my kid. But at the same time, it's really having Brent here makes it easier for me to, I can text Brent and be like, dude, I need to figure out this, and maybe I haven't done this yet, obviously, but I'm saying I could. But having these conversations with you guys and being able to try to navigate what I'm missing, but also anticipate what my kid might need is I feel like these conversations are really helping me with. Does that make sense? I don't know if it's answering your question per se, but having Brent here, I've never, and this is something I brought up the other day to my students or to somebody. I don't remember what I was talking about, but I only had one black teacher in my life, period. And that wasn't until I got to college. And that wasn't until I got to UC Santa Cruz. I had done 3 years of junior college before that. I never had a black teacher, right? So I was always one of a few, and it's usually me and my sister or my brother, right? So sitting here every week and talking to you guys, God, I can't even tell you how much I needed it, and I didn't realize it. You know what I mean? So I'm not trying to get sad. I'm trying not to cry, but just thinking.
I think that's a great answer. This is going to be an emotional episode because I have some tough questions.
Okay.
So, Brent, now you're in the hot seat. My question is for you is, what has it been like for you to enter a space of not really knowing any of us or literally meeting us in person, and you come on to the show and having another queer person, then identifying with Marshall as, part of the Black community, and then having someone who, like Nick, who is completely probably in so many ways so opposite, especially on the surface level. Talk to me about that.
So I guess this is where my childhood upbringing kind of gives me somewhat of an advantage, because I never had the luxury of being around the same group of people for very long. And you kind of learn that you have to not only enter a space authentically, but you also got to be, quick in evaluating if it's a space that's for you. And I can say early on, I realized like, oh, this is definitely a space for me. This is a space that, is that was, welcoming and affirming and very like, just like inclusive, and just, I mean, I still struggle sometimes with being like, oh, well, I'm still the new guy. And in my head, it's like, no, that doesn't make sense. You've been here a while. Why do you feel that way? But, but I never I never felt any like hostility to anything that I was thinking or any, if anything, it was more like, I always felt like, oh, we want to hear more from you. We want to know more. Like, tell us more. Like, give us more suggestions. So, yeah, it was always a very like affirming space. And then, having someone on both sides where I could say these things, whether it was like a queer issue or a Black issue, and just kind of knowing that at least if it wasn't entirely understood, it was something we could talk about from a space of commonality. So that was always good. And I mean, before I came onto the show, obviously I've had a lot of interactions with writers in the spec fic space. So I've kind of encountered, all walks of life, but just being able to have these kind of discussions though, it's different than doing it on like a Twitter thread or like in a Slack group or whatever. These feel, not that those don't feel real and organic, but this just feels more concrete to me. So yeah, I think that's my answer to that question.
So now, Nick, I'm going to you. My question is, how has it been for you growing up in, say, a very conservative place like Utah, not being around a lot of queer people? And then since this year that I've co-hosted and then Brent's come on since October, what has that journey been like for you? And I'm going to ask something specific. What has pleasantly surprised you the most?
Man, loaded question. Just to throw out some geographical clarification there. I actually grew up in Washington State, still a decently conservative town. It was on the east side of Washington State. However, this group right here is my family reunions, my family parties I went to, right? Where so I have a stepfather. He's been there since I was like 2. He's a rock star. He's Hispanic. So every time we got together with his side of the family, I think all 3 of his sisters, they all married Black men. And so all my cousins were half Hispanic, half Black. And then there were us, we were the white kids. And I have a couple cousins from that side of the family that are LGBTQ. So some of that just brings back family, brings home. Specifically, though, outside of that, you're right, I didn't have a lot of exposure to the LGBTQ community. I come from a military background as well, which isn't friendly to that community, but is also homoerotic at the same time. So it's really confusing there. And so coming off of that type of career, staying in Utah and then deciding, hey, like, I'm going to take my writing serious. My first trip, my first conference was writing excuses with Marshall. And so slowly over the years, I've been able to meet members of this community and really just step out of my own headspace and be like, okay, this is someone who I may be interacting with for the next 10 years. Like, I need to put whatever biases that have been ingrained in me, that have been learned or whatever, and I need to get to know them as a person. And that's kind of just what I've done over the last few years. Let's not judge someone based on the labels that society has created. I want to get to know them as a person, as they identify themselves. And so that's been pretty impactful for me. We went to a workshop together, and I kind of saw you from a distance. I was like, okay, like, I don't have a lot of LGBTQ friends. Like, I need to go make some. Like, that's a community I have to write about. I want to include in my writing. Like, I need to get to know more. So, I went out and sought friendship with you, and you were gracious enough to be cool and be kind. and be nice. Sorry, I feel like I'm way off topic all of a sudden too.
You're not.
You're fine.
Yeah. So, but bringing it back to the podcast, it's been really nice having you on. Just because, we are close, we are friends, and things like that. You've been able to help me see things differently than I have in the past. And then that's because I didn't have an understanding and I wasn't looking at it from the right viewpoint at times. And obviously I haven't come from a place of malice or anything like that, with anything. So it's been real nice that way that you've understood and helped me unpack some things over the year. So I feel like I'm missing a part of that.
You're not. This is just, this isn't scripted. So I just want emotion. So I want each of you to think of a question around queerness that you want to ask each person individually while I ask the next questions. Okay. So just think about something that, like, say Brent wants to ask me, Brent wants to ask Marshall, Brent wants to ask Nick, vice versa. But you have a minute, because I have another question. So Marshall, let's talk about Bonds of Brass. When you were reading that, what was at the forefront of your mind?
So when I was reading that book, how do I want to say this? I wanted my kids to read it. I wanted both my kids to read it. But more my youngest, my trans kid, because I wanted him to see there are people of color in a society trying to survive and making it and dealing with the anxiety. He deals with so much anxiety. He deals with so much uncertainty, especially with COVID and everything else. Like it's been a lot. But when I was reading that book, one of the things I do enjoy watching with my kids is space fantasies, Star Wars. We were watching right now we're watching The Bad Batch. We watched Rebels, and like we watched She-Ra. We've watched Steven Universe. Like these are the shows that I see him light up because he sees himself often. And I want him to get to the point to where he's confident enough to read this book in particular, because these are two queer boys having a space freaking adventure and saving the world and having an amazing time. And I want him to see that. I want him to see, like, you can face hardship and adversity, and you can be young, and you can figure out a way to handle it. And so that was at the forefront of my mind. As I was reading it, I was talking to my wife about it often, and I'm like, I want Zoe to read this book. I want Zoe to read this book. He hasn't quite gotten there yet. I mean, again, he'll be 10 in a few weeks. And he's not there yet, but I can't wait until he is. You know what I mean? Because I think he'll just love it. And I want him to be happy. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. So, Nick, I want you to think of one book that you read starring queer characters. Actually, I'm going to pick it for you. A Darker Shade of Magic by V.E. Schwab. When you were reading that, what was at the forefront of your mind when it introduced queer characters?
Yeah, well, we're going to have to cut this part, but you're going to have to tell me which character it was, because I don't feel like it was so, like, it. If you're asking me, like, where was it that it struck me that this character was gay, I'm going to be like, I don't know.
No. Actually, I want to keep this part in because that's the beauty of the story.
Okay.
Because it wasn't Cal or Lila.
No, and they're not, and they're the two main characters that you follow through. It's
the prince.
So you've stumped me on this one.
So I don't know if that's, you want to say something, Brent?
So this is probably a deeper discussion, and I love V. Schwab, so I hope this doesn't like reach her ears and piss her off, but I take umbrage with the way she writes gay men. And
talk to me about it.
I feel like So, and it's not just her. This is endemic of I think a lot of cis women when they attempt to write gay men, they absolve us of all our sexuality in a lot of ways. We become delicate flowers and all we know is romance and soft touches and longing stares. And it's like, no, some of us just screw in the bathroom on the weekend at the club. That happens.
So actually this is great that you say that, because I want you to finish your thought, because it gives me a great question to lead into you.
Okay. So yeah, I just feel like sometimes like it's clear to me that I sometimes I wonder, I'm like, do you actually know any gay men, like in depth? Like, and there's other sides to us. And part of me understands it, right? You want to humanize us. You're trying to make it so that, you know, hetero audiences see us as like, you know, as people, you know, that aren't deviants and we're capable of romance and blah, 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 and so on and so forth. But it's also like, you're erasing like large portions of our experience when you do that. Some of us just have sex to have sex because it's fun. Like we're not always looking for the love of our life. And I think you never really see that in the science fiction and fantasy literature I read, particularly when it's written by cis women. But
so I have lots of feelings about that. Lots. Because when I hear that, okay, I feel like, could it be coming from a place of people who haven't been profoundly loved and have experienced that? And I ask this question because my experience has been on both ends, right? And I think a lot of times in literature, that is all we see from gay men.
Right.
Okay.
Right. Well, that
from straight and gay, let me finish. From straight and gay people. And there was never this time I have yet to read a really profound love story that was difficult and true to the experience that I had. So I don't know if is it just telling an aspect of certain gay relationships, or do you think that some people just want to fuck in the bathroom and be hedonistic is all of gay culture?
I don't think it's
the majority of gay culture.
I wouldn't even say the majority. I just think that it is part of the experience and you don't ever see it. And I think the reason you don't ever see it is because there's still this idea that that's not appropriate, or like that's not the best way to portray like gay men in the public sphere. And it's like, well, no, that's very much part of our culture. It's one of those, and it's one of those, since we're talking about pride, it was one of those foundational things. We're going to put our sexuality out there in the open, and we're not going to like, you know, act like we don't do these things to make you feel more at ease and more comfortable and to sanitize us. But that's why I feel a lot of the gay relationships that I read do. It feels like a sanitization of it. Like, I think it's entirely possible to find a profound love and to also have been screwing every weekend when you were in college or something. Like, I don't think the two have to be separate.
Absolutely. Absolutely. But I really feel the majority of the media that we've seen up until recently has been all we've seen are men constantly being promiscuous, constantly sleeping around, constantly fucking people in the club. And there has been very little representation of actual profound love.
Now, if we want to talk all media, then I agree with you. But if we're talking speculative fiction, I strongly disagree. Like, that has not been the case of what I've read in speculative fiction. Speculative fiction, at least from what I've read for the most part, has been all flowers and love stories and delicate touches and kisses and longing stares and you're the first person I ever loved and we're going to be together forever type shit. And also too the reason I like, so like I think of Kai Shante Wilson. His felt authentic to me. There was love, but it was difficult. It did not come like with easy kisses and longing stares. It was a difficult romance, but it was there. And it's like, you know, and I think sometimes too, when we again, I feel like it's sanitizing our experience. We're disregarding the fact that like most gay men are coming into their adulthood with tons of trauma, tons of issues, and it is something that we deal with and something we don't find a lot of us don't find romances right away in the way that straight people do for those reasons. So I think it's not I don't think it's untrue or, you know, unfair to have like a lot of experiences showing that, you know, showing gay men as adults exploring their sexuality and being like promiscuous or, you know, being in the clubs and whatnot, because for many of us, myself included, we got a whole decade plus of our life taken away from us. We didn't get to have the high school experience of crushes and dates and trying to figure out like what you liked and what you didn't like. We don't get to do that until we're in our 20s. But by then we're already screwed up in the head and we're not doing it necessarily in a healthy way right off the bat. And I don't think that gets, at least from what I've seen in science fiction and fantasy, you don't ever really see gay men dealing with those kind of issues.
Okay. So I think I agree with you there. I think I understand what you're saying. Like in speculative and science fiction, you don't see that as much. Marshall, you had wanted to say something?
Well, this might be something we have to cut, but I just, you said that you wanted us to think of questions, right? For each other. And I knew I wanted to ask Brent a specific question. And since after what he just said, I think I've kind of molded the question in a way that I think I want to throw out there. So I don't know when we want to do that or if now's the time or not, but
no, do it.
Yeah.
Okay. So, look, man, here's what I want to throw out there, because I follow you on Instagram and you and I have had many conversations, and sometimes you'll throw out little things like gay black men, X, Y, and Z. And you might throw some, you get kind of upset about something that is specific to the black queer community, right? And so the question I have for you is, do you see in speculative fiction those same things that you have a beef with, or is there anybody that has captured what you want or what you're having a frustration with in the stories that you've read? Does that make sense?
Yes, no, that makes perfect sense. So my answer to that is, well, unfortunately with science fiction and fantasy, we are still at the baseline of even trying to get enough black gay men writing about black gay characters to even like really even have examples to pull from. I mean, we have Kai Shante Wilson, obviously. He's brilliant. We have Christopher Caldwell. He's more in the storytelling, short story realm, but he's also doing very good work. I know Ryan Douglas has his horror YA coming out soon. So they're incoming, but there's not enough to really, I think, to have like a deep dive discussion. I know there's also Sam Delaney. He's classic, obviously, so you can't.
Oh,
yeah. But I still don't, I mean, at least for me, I don't feel like there's enough of a canon necessarily to really dissect that. I feel like we're just still in the very like infant stages of having enough black gay speculative fiction by black gay men to really kind of have that talk. But it's funny you mentioned Bonds of Brass, because I remember that there was a bit of controversy with that book because a lot of black gay male authors were upset about it, because it's like, damn, we didn't even get the chance to tell this story. They sold it to a white woman and she's making bank off of it. Like, we can't even tell our own stories. We're out here struggling in these query trenches, trying to even get an agent, let alone sell a book. And a white woman decides to tell our story, and she gets paid for it.
Mm-hmm.
And I definitely, I guess to answer your question, I don't feel like there's enough material yet for me to really make those deeper critiques. But what I have seen, at least from the ones I named, I'm hopeful that, we'll get some of that more raw, like deeper intersectional stuff that I know speculative fiction is really capable of doing. So yeah, I don't know if that answers your question or not, but
no, it does. And I've seen you make a distinction between like white queer culture and black queer culture. And so I'm just
different.
it's and I mean, obviously it would be different, right? Yeah. And I find it really interesting, and mostly because I'm trying to support, students plus my son, as they get older too. And I am talking to students that come back and talk to me about things too. So anything I can get, I'm trying to make sure that I understand, you know what I mean? So I always appreciate how blunt you are about how you feel about these things, because it's important. It's important to just like not beat around the bush and be like, okay, this is it. Black queer people do this, white queer people do this, and this is the way it is, kind of thing for you in your experience, right? Yeah,
in my experience for sure. And I mean, I kind of feel like I have to be that blunt about it sometimes, because it's like, unfortunately, I think when you're black and you're queer, you're dealing with very stubborn people on both sides of the equation, and you have to just be like blunt and just put it out there. And you like it or you hate it, but you have to be blunt.
For sure.
All right. So who wants to ask a question next?
Ooh.
Go ahead, Brent.
I'm trying to think of, okay, so I will say this. Yes, this is probably gonna be an emotional question, Marshall, but I'm gonna lay into it. So well, first I'm gonna start off with a statement. I will tell you right now, I would be a much, much different man and this isn't, God, I hope this doesn't come across as slandering my parents, because I don't want it to be that way. But if I had a dad and a mom that just were as affirming of me at that age as you are with your kid, I'd be a much different person. So I've never said it before, but it just made my heart swell hearing that the first time you watch your kid up. So so I have to say that. But okay, so a hopeful question. What 10 years from now, where do you want your trans son to be at?
Honestly, and I do appreciate you saying that. And that's something, I mean, we've butted heads against family members that were like, and at the time, she's too young, she doesn't know, blah, blah, blah. And it's like, how dare you tell me what my kid needs, right? How dare you come at me at my parenting, right? If my kid needs a thing or says that he is a thing or needs to be something, then I'm going to do my damnedest to make sure that they get to be who they need to be. And that was, and I got to bring this up because it's Pride Month. And it's something I'm really, and speaking of try not to slander your parents, my parents, although they accepted, my sister came out years ago as well, and has since married a guy and has a kid, actually has a second one coming. But so both sides of my family have queer folks, right? But like the trans thing was really difficult, right? And just because, and only if all I want to say is the difficult part is just getting the damn pronouns right, like that's been a struggle. And it's been a struggle up until my parents were just up this last weekend. And I meant to double check with my wife, but they didn't screw up one time this time. Not once. Nobody did. And I honestly think that they're finally, and this goes with my in-laws for the same. They haven't screwed up in a long time. And I really believe that they're doing what we suggested they do. How about you use the right, his pronouns when he's not around, when you speak, anytime you speak about him, right? And it was, and I thought about it, I think it was sometime Sunday, because they came up Friday night. And I thought about sometime Sunday, I was like, they have not one time screwed up. They've said, all right, kids, let's do this. All right, kids, let's do this. And they've used the same, because they used to say, all right, girls, whatever. And it's like, that would drive us crazy. And up until and we've been apart from them we have not seen them since last February. And so that was huge, right? But to go back to what your actual question, because I had to throw that out here. In 10 years, shit, he'll be almost 20.
20, yeah.
Fuck. I want him to be wherever he wants to be, but on top of that, I want him to feel confident. I want all of the support from my family and his friends and the small close-knit community that we've created kind of around him, to make him feel confident enough to drop some of the anxiety to really be who he wants to be, and not filter and falter and he stumbles a lot because he's worried. He's so worried about everything because he doesn't know, right? So where I want him to be, I know he's very creative. I think even though he's very anxious, he loves to dance around and perform, and he sings and he does all this stuff. And it's like, he's always been so anxious to do it, but it's like, I feel like that's something he's going to end up doing too. But I want him to be excited to go to college. He's like, oh, I'm never going to leave home. And, because that's the anxiety part, but it's like, yeah, I want him to go out. I want him to go to college. I want him to go to and be what he wants to be, and I hope that he looks back and says the opposite of what you just said, Brent, which breaks my heart. Right. And it's like, I want him to look back and say, because of that support, because of, we never wavered when this, and, we had some ideas, but he was 7, I want to say, when he finally just had the confidence to say, like, hey, this is who I am. And we're like, all right, cool. And so we got to figure out some stuff down the line, with, if he wants to do blockers and stuff like that. But like, that's all stuff that he gets to decide. Right. So to answer your question, I want him to be where he wants to be, and I'm going to be right there regardless. So I don't care what that looks like. It's sappy, but it's sappy.
That's a great answer. That's such a great answer. Oh, I'm over here getting emotional.
Yeah. I'm trying, man. I got one eye leaking a little bit.
I'm over here like, oh, man, I'm trying not to.
Nick, you got something to say? Go ahead.
I do. Brent, you asked the perfect question, because my question for you, Marshall.
Oh, man, I'm under the hot seat.
You are. It's a perfect follow-up question. So I want to know, as writers and as friends, how we can be, what can we do to help your son reach that point where you want him to be in the next 10 years?
Honestly, the kid reads a ton. He loves graphic novels. He reads, he watches TV. He loves speculative fiction. I just want him to I want you guys to create something that he can consume. That's what I need from you. I want him to be able to consume something from people that he knows or knows tangentially through me. And I can say, oh my God, my buddy Brent wrote this thing. You got to read this thing. And he'll be like, holy shit, this thing is amazing. I see myself in this thing. And that's what I need from you guys. So I'm going to keep the community part. I need you guys to just, oh God, not to be cheesy, keep writing, but I need you guys to freaking produce and give him something that he can see himself in. Because that's what we all want, right? I mean, that's something that I feel like is getting so much better, but it's not it's not everybody is as has so much to choose from right now. You know what I mean? So I think that he needs more.
Yeah, love it. I will do my best.
All right, that's your task, buddy.
Done. Writing it down, because when you write it down, you do it, right?
It becomes a thing. Exactly.
Will, can I ask another question?
Yeah, everyone's supposed to ask each other each question, so everyone should have 3 questions.
Yeah.
Oh, I thought we were only asking one person. Okay.
Nope, you're asking everyone.
Well, my next question is for you, Will. As perfect as it is to Marshall's response to my question, I'll follow up to you. Marshall is asking, for us to be able to write something that his child can consume and see themselves in. So my question to you is, what are some ways that a cisgendered writer can incorporate the LGBTQ community in their writing without trying to tell their story? Does that make sense?
Yeah. I think one, just be inclusive and add people. And I think the idea of telling someone's story, and I probably will have people who disagree with me. I think it's important to tell stories of people who are unlike you, and that you try your best to do it. And if it's going to publication, I don't think as a straight cisgendered person, I think you should be very cautious about telling someone's coming out story or telling a story of what it's like to go through life as someone who's gay or bi or anyone who fits under that queer umbrella. But I think all I'm asking is for people to write the world as it is, with nuances and everything. I think that's the biggest thing that you could do, is to really write it with nuance and to break stereotypes.
So write in a way that kind of gets rid of the white default, would you say?
I think it's just writing the world as it is. Yeah, I guess the white default, it's hard for me to actually, I feel like, answer this, because when I write, I try to write as the world is. I have friends who are totally different than me. I live in a city that is so multicultural that I'm influenced by everything. I also grew up in a Black neighborhood, and I had all these experiences really young. So the idea that I didn't see these characters when I was growing up struck me as really odd. And I was usually, if I was around mostly white people, this is a great example of Buffy. When Kendra died, the first thing I said, I was like, of course they killed the Black girl. Of course. You actually have one Black girl and she's dead. And it was the same thing of Willow and Tara. Of course Tara died. Of course. And the sad thing is Tara died right around probably when Michael passed away. Right? So it was all of these things that I think I just kept seeing, that if you're in a gay relationship, it can't be profound love. It can't be special, and tragedy has to happen. Right? So much so that when tragedy happened to me, it was through my lens of course it happened. And that's not reality. So I think it's important to just make your worlds as broad as possible without trying to tell specifically queer stories. But I'll also say this. I think if you have a writer who is sensitive and talented enough, I think you can have people who can capture things really beautifully. And I think this is where it comes down to the publishing world, to Brent's point about Bonds of Brass. Was it Emily's intention to, first of all, I don't know her intention. That's number one. Was it her intention maybe to try to tell this Black character's story in science fiction where she felt she was robbing it of others? Right? I don't know. I'm assuming no. I think she was trying to write inclusively and really write broadly and try to do it well. It's upsetting because when you actually have people who are Black and queer, they can't even get a dent into it. So I would say instead of being upset with Emily, we need to really put pressure on as many people of editors and the publishing houses, sales and marketing, and ask them why. For every white person like Emily who's tried to write inclusively, they should have 20 of those Black gay authors publishing books in speculative fiction. Right? This is how we should look at it. And I think that is the biggest thing that we can do. I think about this a lot for when I make it, right? I feel like it will be my job, my responsibility to always be a voice for people who haven't had a chance at it, you know, and to champion those books that are part of my queer community, but specifically like Black trans women, right? Like when you talk about like on the lowest totem pole of society, it is Black trans women, right? So that's one thing that I can do. And I can uplift every single person who needs to be uplifted, you know, and I will, and you know, you of course want to promote your friends, and of course I would, but you try to pull people and so that they get the light. So for each light, and I've made this decision early on, for any, God willing, my book comes out and it happens, I will make sure that I always talk about someone in the queer community, someone in the Black community, someone in the trans community, and they will most likely, because of the way that I read, it's going to probably be a lot of intersectionality. Because when Brent talked about, like if you're reading actually a lot of Black writers, you're probably reading you are reading the best works on there. And that is literally what I've surrounded myself with for the last 5 years. Because it was the one time, okay, that I've actually even remotely have seen New York represented in the way that it is. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, it does. And it gives me a lot to think about, you know, not only for myself and my writing, but, you know, how do I want to represent myself once I make it as well? You know, who do I want to bring up with me? And like, how do I help other communities, other groups be lifted as well? So love it.
I'd actually like Brent, like, what do you think I'm missing anything when I say that, when I talk about it that way?
No, I think I do think the onus needs to be more on the publishers than the authors for sure, because publishers, well, and it kind of goes back to, I guess, my umbrage that I take sometimes with the way that I think gay men are sometimes written. But I think that's because the people in the publishing structure like to see us written in a certain way. So those are the books that get purchased, and those books tend to not be written by us. So, you know, I think it is part of the onus should definitely be on, you know, publishing and what they're choosing and how they're choosing it and why they're choosing it.
And Brent, you brought this up a second time, is how, you know, gay men are portrayed and stuff like that. And you brought, you know, the guys that just want to hook up in the club on the weekend, you know, that type of mentality. It reminds me of our favorite show, How to Get Away with Murder, right? You had two very different, I guess you could say, stereotypes of gay men in that show and how they interacted with each other. Every time you bring it up, I'm just like, you're right. Like, we do not see that main character and how he's acting. I haven't seen it in a book. Granted, I'm not as well read as you guys are, you know, in this. So like, it's a very interesting point that you bring up, that we're just now seeing that on TV and in movies and stuff like that. I feel like,
like I've never seen a Connor Walsh in a science fiction or fantasy book. Like I've never seen that. I've also never seen that guy fall in love with an Oliver either in in science fiction or fantasy either. And I think I was on the panel the other day where Craig Gitney, he brought up a great point too. He was like, I don't just want to see us. Well, he was like, if we do fall in love, I don't want it just being the hot gays that fall in love. Like, we come in all body types and shapes just like everybody else. We all don't go to the gym. Some of us eat donuts. Like, you know, to his point, he was like, you know, the kind of relationships that you are getting to see on both sides of the equation are just very stereotypical in terms of like how body image is presented. And that's a whole nother conversation. But yeah, all to say that we still have a lot of room for growth in how gay men are portrayed.
All right, Marshall, you also need to ask me and Nick a question.
Yeah, I'm gonna start with you, and it has to do with it has to do with what we're talking about, but also has to do with you coming onto this podcast as well read as you are, and before Brent got here, and coming in the dynamic between, you know, me and Nick, right? I guess what I want to ask you is, do you think that, how do I want to phrase this? This is going to be interesting. What do you think your impact has been on us? And I'm asking you this because I feel like you've had a great impact on this group and this dynamic, but because you are who you are, what do you think you've brought to this group? And have you seen a change since you've been here in how we interact and or how we've changed in our conversations together?
I don't
I'm letting you pat yourself on the back a little bit at the same time, just so you know. It's a weird question, but I want you to acknowledge the impact that you've had is what I'm going for here.
Please pat yourself on the back.
I'm not good at that.
I know.
I would say I don't think about the impact that I have because I feel like the three of you impact me in such profound ways that I feel really true that we are all brought together for a reason and that I am my higher self and I'm pushed to my higher self with every conversation that we have, especially when I don't necessarily agree with you or you push me to think in another way. Because sometimes I think as human beings, we can all be really rigid in our thinking and really like, no, this is it. And when it comes from people that you respect and love and they're wonderful people, I feel more humbled by having the three of you in my life and being on the podcast. So that is why I don't really ever think I have an impact. I feel like you are all doing more of a service of building a better me than I could ever do.
Well, I need you to know that I'm not sure where we would be if you weren't here. And a lot of it has to do with the fact that we're sitting here having another Pride episode and a year has gone by. And if you go back and listen to that episode, 37? You go back and listen to episode 37 and you listen to the Nick and the Will and the Marshall of this episode. It's hard to believe it's only been a year. And I know we're getting a little sappy here, but at the same time, like, honestly, to me, it's huge. I've leaned on you guys more than, I don't know what I would have done if you guys weren't here. And you keeping us consistent and all this is super important. So we're talking about Pride here, right? And so I'm bringing it back and I'm going to throw a question at Nick here, but he has something to say. So go ahead, Nick.
I'm coattailing off you, Marshall, and yelling at Will as well to let him know the impact that he has had. I mean, we all know you are a big personality and a strong personality, but you also are a personality that comes from love, and peace and acceptance. I'm going to say this. I would not be where I am today without your impact on me in my life. Like,
damn it, that was my question.
Oh, okay. Well, you want to say your question? I'll give you my...
No, my question really is based off what Will just said. I've seen a profound change in you, and I knew you almost a year probably between, you meeting Will and us having this whole podcast and stuff. So I want to know, like, because we're talking about pride, and how do you feel when we are having these conversations now, and how much of that is because of Will and really because of Will being as amazing as he is and asking these questions and making you think about these things. Does that make sense?
Yeah. No, I can definitely talk to that too. I mean, Will's impact on me, really hit hard during our last episode during Pride. Will and we were talking for a few months. We went through Futurescapes together that year. So it wasn't like out of the ordinary to have conversations with you. But Pride, you really put me on my toes on that one. I think that episode is really where I feel like I stopped doing a lip service to what, stop doing a lip service for my intentions on writing LGBTQ characters. And, I didn't realize it at the time. I was just saying it, not really living it, in a sense. But we were talking about Gideon the Ninth. And it was at that point when and I'm going to get Terry here in a second. You mentioned that was the first time in your life at your ripe old age of 20, times whatever, that you'd seen yourself in a book, in a character. And for some reason, that hit me like a ton of bricks. That as well read as you are, it wasn't until like 2018 when Gideon the Ninth came out. 2019. And you said that was the first time you saw yourself in a character in a book. And I think at that point, I really changed for the better of really looking at these situations and taking them very seriously, of knowing, hey, what I'm writing and what I'm reading is directly affecting Will. Now in that sense, it's directly affecting Brent. It's directly affecting Marshall and his family. Like, I really started taking my reading seriously and my writings a lot more seriously to be an ally to this community. Does that answer your question, Marshall?
Yes, sir, it does.
Yeah, I want to just comment on Gideon because I did see an aspect of myself, I think, because it was ridiculous. And it was just, that book is just bonkers and hilarious. I will, to Brent's point, Kai Shanti Wilson, right? Wilson's his last name, right, Brent?
Yes, yep.
That actually was one of the first books that I think I saw another aspect of just being gay, that was messy and complicated, because relationships are messy and complicated. And it probably was the first time it freed me in a lot of way in my writing too, just like Gideon did in a different way. I still don't think until I guess what I'm writing, that I ever felt like I've seen a profound sense of love that's complicated and that I experienced early on. Thanks for the compliments. I wasn't expecting that, and we can move on. So Brent,
well, here's the thing, buddy. Mm-hmm. Before you move on, I'm throwing this out there at you because Look, you threw this episode at us. We were supposed to record a different episode tonight. Behind the curtain, here we are.
Mhm.
We were supposed to record a different episode. He threw this at us, and Will loves to ask these questions of us, and I don't have any problem answering them. But I'm glad that we actually got to throw something a little bit back at you and make you talk about yourself, because you don't give yourself enough credit. And I don't think honestly, I don't think any of us give ourselves enough credit sometimes. I think that's why I think you're right. I think we all have come together for a reason, and we're all here to bring each other up and hold each other up. So I didn't want to let you move on before I told you that how much I appreciate all of you, but also I'm glad we had that conversation and I got to see your face, and nobody's benefiting from the video feed, although I'm secretly recording it. So we'll see what happens later for our patrons.
Okay.
All right, you can move on now.
So Brent, you have 2 questions. You have to ask me and Nick.
Yes.
So
yes, I do. So I will start with you, Will. You mentioned we've actually been talking about things that we wish we saw more of. I know I've been doing a lot of talking about that. So what do you want to see more of when it comes to the portrayal of queer people in general in speculative fiction?
What do I want to see? I think to your point, I think we do need to see, like when I was like asking that hard question, I was like, I disagree with you. I think we definitely need to see nuanced relationships in with the gay community, not just these longingly stares. I think we need to see complex relationships. What I would like to also see, and I think this is specifically, I think from my experience, I think when a lot of people meet me or are introduced to me, they form this picture in their head of what I should be. And 9 times out of 10, I don't check their boxes of what I should be. And I'm going to give you an example. When I speak, you can clearly tell I'm gay, right? And this would used to torture me as a kid. Because when I speak, I don't hear that lisp or that like effeminate sound, right? And I was going for a little bit in my like around 20 to a dialect coach to get rid of it. And then the person I was dating said, why? Why are you doing that? And then he said something else. He said, you know what's the most radical thing you can do? It's to accept yourself as the way you are. Because when people hear that from me, or effeminate gestures, they automatically think what I'm into sexually, being in a gay relationship. They automatically think that this is my personality, that I'm docile, or that I can only talk about like fashion, hair, makeup, pop culture, or like that I was constantly going out and partying. And what was irritating, and it is still to this day, that when people find out I have 4 different black belts, when people hear that I play music, or that I write, or that I have a degree in biochemistry, it's constantly this feeling that I don't check their boxes. And it is disheartening. But it's also fucking annoying. I'm sorry that my strength of character and my personality makes you feel less than, because that was not my point. My point was to say that you can experience everything in life and you can be whatever you want. And I will just not be dictated by what you think I should be. And I think that's what we need to see in the queer community. Okay. I think we need to see people who are multifaceted and do not fit in a box. Because this is where I really agree with Brent. We are only seeing, like, the cute people get together. We don't see, you know, the people who are just like average Joe, or the people who are quote unquote not attractive by society standards have someone who's really attractive by their side, you know, or that if someone is effeminate, okay, that makes them weak and docile. Because I've thrown down with plenty of taller, bigger, stronger, masculine men that I've beaten the shit out of, okay, and also fucked. So I'm sorry. Like, I think we need to see more nuanced stories and more of an array of the queer community, and do so with purpose and thoughtfulness and strength.
Yep.
That's my answer. I hope it was a good one.
That was a good answer. Yes, I'm in 100% agreement. Yeah, I definitely have thoughts. I'm in total agreement with you. Okay, so I got to ask Nick a question. All right. So Nick. All right. So I know you beat yourself up quite a bit, but you shouldn't. Yeah. Yeah. You give yourself some credit. Like you, and I mean, this question, I guess, is probably going to be a little emotional too, but you know what? I'm going to ask it because what I have seen from you is, I know a lot of people, straight people, that would have gotten challenged on some of the things that I've seen you get challenged on, and who would have put up walls, who would have got defensive, who would have walked away from the conversation, who would have, you know, made some snarky comment or anything like that. So my question to you is, how do you like keep an open heart when you hear these conversations, and when things are said to you that may not, that may be a little rough to hear?
Wow.
God, that's a good question.
Yeah, it is, man. It's funny though, because you say, you know, you've heard me get challenged on some things, and I don't feel like, maybe I have, but like I'm just in that point of like when someone challenges me on something, I'm just like, all right, cool, teach me, like let's learn, right? And I think, you know, that's just kind of my mindset, because it's, you know, being involved in the LGBTQ community as trying to be an ally, becoming an ally, right? Like I just don't know a lot. Like I didn't grow up with the best friend that was gay or trans or anything like that, right? And it kind of, man, I would say I just naturally have that type of personality where I can take some beatings verbally and just still be able to go and like take it with a grain of salt and just be like, all right, cool. Like I'll learn from it. Cause I've got another friend of mine who straight up says, you're the only person that I can be brutally honest with, and you don't try to fight back and you don't get defensive. And it's like, well, if you have a problem, for one, let's talk, right? We're going to hear each other's side, but you're saying something for a reason. So it must mean like I can learn from that. So I don't know. You caught me off guard on this one. You might have to re-ask the question. I'm scrambling over here.
Well, can I add something, just because I know Nick and because I have a lot of and as I've said multiple times, I live in a very conservative community. I would say all but maybe one or two of the questions Will has ever asked you, Nick, if I were to turn around and ask any of my conservative friends that same exact question, they would have lost their fucking shit. They would either stormed off, they would have hung up whatever Zoom call we were on, they would have hollered at me and said, I'm not racist, or some shit like that, right? Or I'm not homophobic, or how dare you, you know?
Yep.
But you have this way about you, and I think that's why we were sitting on that fucking beach together, and you're asking me these questions, and you asked me, some of the questions you asked me were so sideways. I'm like, I could get mad right now, but I'm like, but this guy is not trying to be a dick. He's not racist in the way that I know. He's trying to ask me, he's really trying to understand. And so I don't know it says something about you, because I've had countless conversations in the last few years with conservative folks, and I have had to give up because there's no scenario where those folks come away from that conversation the way that I come away for those conversations with you, right? Or that I hear somebody ask you a question and we're good, right? I will still talk to some of these people I'm talking about right now, but like we're not good. I just don't want to ever have that conversation again with them. You know what I mean? And I think that says something about you, Nick. So I don't know. I love that question.
I appreciate it.
You see it too, right?
Well, I mean, it's so crazy. And you mentioned, how do I approach things with such an open heart? And I really, at the end of the day, religiously, right? Like, Will, I'm going to let you actually talk first because you have your hand up.
You just said religiously, and then you stopped. So I think you have to finish that.
I'm gonna plan out that thought first.
Okay.
So Will, your hand's raised here.
I think it when you say things or you ask things, and I confront you with certain things. The thing is that with Nick, it comes from the most purest place of curiosity. And sometimes naiveness. And the measure of a strength of a man isn't about knowing everything that's right. It's about knowing when you don't know. And when you mess up, you do better. That is the strength of a man's character and a woman character and a non-binary character, anyone. But that is really truly of someone who is true of spirit and can mess up. And because we all do, because we're all human. None of us are perfect. I don't think anyone knows everything all the time. And there's constantly ways that we're learning. And I think also Nick is having the strength to be vulnerable and to say, I don't know this. And if I'm sorry if I came across offensive, or that was never my intention. And I know I did, and I will do better. I think everyone can listen to our episodes. And if you can internalize that, you'll be, I just think, a better human being.
No, I think you encapsulated it, Will, honestly. I mean, and that's the thing. And that's why when we were having those conversations when I first met him, it's like, it wasn't really, it was pure curiosity. It was curiosity. It was like, I'm going to ask this black guy who I just met all these questions because I need to know these questions and I feel safe with him. And I was like, okay, well, that question's kind of offensive, but I know it's from a place of curiosity and not of, anything else but that. Like, he just needed to know because he wanted to be better. And I think that's huge.
Yeah.
And you've come, and that was 3 years ago.
Can you believe that? Can you believe that? So it's totally weird.
Yeah, I can believe it.
And it's because of those conversations with you, Marshall, that really, and with you as well, Will, that have really helped me be more open, in being, I guess you say, like, meeting people and acquaintance with people and like getting rid of my own biases. Biases that I had previously. I think one of the stronger points of being able to have an open heart in all of this is admitting that I've been taught wrong along the way, right? That I've learned things incorrectly. Back to, religiously, I want to be as close as living a Christ-like love to my fellow man as possible. And in order for me to do that, that goes like treating everyone with kindness and respect and love, and just trying to understand them at, every level that I can. I feel like that's the only way I could live a Christ-like love life, if that makes sense. Changing everything has changed a lot for me. So, Brent, did that answer all of your question there?
Awesome.
Yes, it did. Yeah.
Man, y'all got me sweating bullets over here.
How does everyone feel about this episode?
Yeah, I was just gonna say, I keep opening my door periodically because I'm like sweating. But yeah, no, I think this was great. I think this episode is a perfect way to start Pride Month of episodes. We all put ourselves out there. We got to ask each other the hard questions, but we also know that I feel like we're all here. We've all kind of come to a consensus that we're all here for a reason together, which I love, Will. So thank you for putting that out there. Like, it makes me feel like, all right, well, even though this didn't work out, or this is freaking hard as hell, like, all right, we're the four of us are here for a reason.
Yeah.
And I think this is important. So yeah, is there some other way? Well, this might be off mic, but what do you want to do? How do you want to wrap this up?
Just your thoughts on the episode and to kick off Pride. Just what I asked.
Okay. All right, cool.
Yeah, no, I'm gonna. I just
closing thoughts.
I want to shout out Brent though, because Brent, as you mentioned, is like quote unquote the new guy. But having you jump in with the three of us, like, I don't feel like it has been hard or difficult. Like, it's really nice being able to have someone else come in and add to our group, and like it just blended perfectly at the time. Like, so I appreciate everything that you've done with us, being here with us. I really feel like you've definitely elevated me in ways I don't even know yet, but I know when I'm writing, I'm like, oh, hey, Brent said this one time, like, I got to remember this. So, I just want to express my appreciation for you in this episode and things like that, because I know you and Will are definitely big parts of my life now. And Marshall, 3 years running, you can't break up with me now. So
I know, right? We'll see. But you know what's funny though? I'm joking, obviously. But what's funny is when Brent started guesting on the shows, Will kept texting me and saying like, we should invite Brent. We should invite Brent to be a full-time host. And I was like, I don't know, man. He's editing, he's busy, he's doing all these things. I'm just like, I don't want to take up more of his time, blah, blah, that kind of thing. And I'm really glad I stopped saying that. I'm just glad that I was just like, you know what? Like, you're right. He needs to be around us. Will was right again. Which should be the name of the episode. Will was right again. But Will was right. And I appreciate all three of you more than I can tell you. So I cannot wait to see what the rest of the Pride episodes are. I know we have to still bamboozle my wife into coming on here for an episode, so that should be entertaining. But we have a lot more in store for Pride Month, so definitely stay tuned for sure.
And I want to close out with Brent too, what he thought of the episode.
Yeah, no, I thought this was great. I mean, I love I love these conversations that we have, and like, I just love we can go into all these nuanced places. And what I also appreciate as a guy who wears his heart on his sleeve and who's had to kind of relearn that trait, because I know Will talked about, you know, people's expectations. Well, people's expectations of me as being a more masculine, I guess, supposedly, whatever, gay guy, is that you don't really show those emotions as much. And I very much am an emotional guy, and I wear it on my sleeve. So it's nice to be in a space where everybody does that, and it's not judged, and it's not, you know, it's welcomed. So, you know, as not only as a black man, but also as a gay man, it's appreciated. So I just like that we could just be honest and open, and it was a great discussion.
And this has been Just Keep Writing, a podcast for writers, by writers, to keep you writing. You can find us at justkeepwriting.org. Follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube. Feel free to reach out to any of us on our social medias, and please jump in our Just Keep Writing Discord channel. Links to all of that is in the show notes. Lastly, please support our show by going to patreon.com/justkeepwriting. We offer daily writing prompts, early access to podcast episodes, and much more. Thanks for listening, and just keep writing.